Twilight draped itself across the battlefield, casting its melancholic hues onto the mud-filled trenches that seemed to stretch infinitely. The dying sun painted streaks of amber and crimson in the sky, creating a stark contrast to the ground below, muddied with the prints of heavy boots and the scars of war. Approaching the makeshift hospital, the air was thick with a symphony of contrasting scents. Fresh earth mingled with the metallic tang of blood. The stench of decay wafted, carried by the gusts of wind, telling tales of battles past, of young men who had met their untimely ends. Overlaid with this was the acrid aroma of gunpowder, a smell I had come to associate with the sudden, deafening booms that interrupted our nights. The hospital tents themselves bore witness to the unending onslaught of wounded souls they sheltered. Their off-white canvases were marred with brown patches, evidence of bloodstains from days and perhaps weeks ago. Every time I walked past them, a shiver travelled down my spine as I remembered the stories each stain held. Stories of brave young men, now reduced to hushed murmurs and fading blood spots. The evening breeze was bone-chilling, as if nature itself was lamenting the tragedies that unfolded day after day. It whispered secrets through the tattered edges of the tents, making them rustle in soft protest. These very breezes occasionally brought an unexpected scent, sometimes the fresh green smell of distant untouched woods, or at times the distant aroma of someone's hastily cooked meal, reminding us of a world beyond the horrors we were entrenched in. Inside the tents, another world revealed itself. The sharp, clinical scent of antiseptics attempted to mask the deeper, more haunting odours of festering wounds and sweat. If you focused, you could even detect the faint, musky undertones of fear. The constant hum of hushed voices, punctuated by groans of pain or the rare laughter, created an ambience of restrained chaos. Dim lanterns cast flickering shadows, revealing cots lined in rows, some occupied, some waiting for their next inhabitant. Candles, their flames dancing, were placed strategically, creating pockets of warm golden light amidst the gathering gloom. The soft glow made the medical tools gleam, scalpel blades, forceps, and syringes, all ready for the next emergency. Beside them lay bandages, their pristine white a sharp contrast to the grimy environment. As the last rays of the sun vanished, surrendering the world to an encroaching darkness, a deceptive calm settled. But those of us who had been here long enough knew that this calm was just the world taking a breath, gathering itself for another night of turmoil and trepidation. It was the quiet before the storm, and the night was yet young. Amidst the sea of white, worn and tattered tents, a figure moved with purpose. Her stride was steady, revealing an internal strength, but her eyes, those weary eyes, spoke of stories untold. Evie Turner was not just another nurse. She was a beacon of hope in a world drowning in despair. As she moved through the camp, the last of the twilight illuminated her auburn hair, those fiery curls mostly concealed beneath the white cap of her nurse's uniform. Every so often, as she tilted her head, the few medals on her chest would catch the dying light, shimmering momentarily, a testament to her courage and dedication. While Evie's present was filled with the horrors of war, her mind occasionally wandered, seeking solace in memories of yesteryears. A gust of wind would carry the scent of fresh daisies, and suddenly she'd be back in her hometown, running through meadows with her vibrant hair trailing behind her like a fiery comet's tail. The laughter, the picnics, and the warm embrace of her mother all stood in stark contrast to the blood and grime that now defined her days. But it wasn't just the pleasant memories that haunted Evie. There were shadows too. In quiet moments, the face of a young man would surface in her mind. Those deep blue eyes, that carefree laugh, and promises of a future together. Thomas had been her anchor, her love. But the war, with its cruel whims, had taken him away, leaving behind just memories and a telegram that she had read 100 times over. Killed in action, it had coldly declared. That loss had left a gaping hole in Evie's heart, but it had also ignited a fierce determination. If she couldn't save Thomas, she'd save every other young soul that crossed her path. Every soldier she stitched up, every fever she fought down was a silent rebellion against the war that had stolen her love. She was often found at the bedside of the gravely injured soldiers when everyone else had given up hope. Holding a young man's hand, whispering words of comfort, and at times singing lullabies to ease their passage into the eternal night. It was during one of these moments, as she comforted a dying soldier, that Nurse Clara found her.
"Evie,"
she whispered, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder.
"you need to rest."
Evie looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears.
"I can't, not when there's so much to be done."
Clara sighed, understanding the pain behind those words.
"You've done more than your share. Remember, to save others, you need to save yourself first."
Evie nodded, the weight of her memories pressing down on her. The juxtaposition of her past innocence with her current reality was a burden she bore silently. For amidst the chaos of war, amidst the pain and the bloodshed, Evie Turner had found her purpose: to heal, to comfort, and to remember. The early morning hours in the medical tent were usually the quietest. The chaos of the previous night had subsided, giving way to an eerie stillness. On this particular morning, with most of the medical staff taking a rare moment to rest, Evie took the opportunity to rearrange supplies and take inventory. While moving a cabinet, her hand brushed against an irregularity in the tent's floor. Curiosity piqued, she knelt down and felt around the spot, her fingers tracing the outline of what seemed to be a concealed compartment. With cautious movements, she managed to pry it open, revealing a leather-bound ledger, its cover tainted with dark, dried blood. The discovery of a hidden ledger in itself was intriguing, but what truly caught Evie's attention were the entries within. Lines of meticulously written codes, each corresponding to dates and times, filled its pages. To a layman, these codes might seem indecipherable, but Evie, with her knowledge of Morse code, recognized a familiar pattern. Hastily, she began the arduous process of decoding. Each line revealed more about specific soldiers, their names, the severity of their injuries, and then, chillingly, a single word repeated several times: harvested. The realization made her heart race. The entries painted a macabre picture of certain soldiers being selected, not for treatment, but for something far more sinister. The coded messages also contained other information, detailing where the harvested materials were sent, and hints about buyers in distant cities. Evie's stomach churned. What had she stumbled upon? Flashbacks to recent surgeries rushed through her mind. There had been moments when Dr. Allen had taken over surgeries, especially when they were deemed critical, ushering others out of the tent. With this newfound knowledge, a sinking feeling began to settle. Were these the moments when these unspeakable acts were committed? Evie's hands trembled as she turned each page, hoping against hope that her suspicions would prove unfounded. But the ledger was damning. The scale of the operation, the meticulous planning, and the coded language all pointed to a clandestine and gruesome operation. A sudden noise made her snap the ledger shut. Footsteps were approaching. In a rush, she placed the ledger back in its hidden compartment and swiftly moved the cabinet back to its original position, just as Nurse Clara entered the tent.
"Evie? What are you doing here? I thought you'd be resting."
Clara remarked, looking slightly puzzled. Evie tried to maintain her composure.
"Just thought I'd reorganize a bit, couldn't sleep."
Clara looked at her for a moment, her eyes sharp and assessing.
"All right, but don't push yourself too hard. Remember, we have another long night ahead."
Evie nodded, her mind still racing.
"I won't. Thanks, Clara."
As Clara moved away, attending to her duties, Evie sat for a moment, trying to process her discovery. She felt a duty to the soldiers to uncover the truth and put an end to whatever sinister operation was underway. Yet, she knew she had to tread carefully. If her suspicions about Dr. Allen were correct, she was up against someone cunning and dangerous. Determined, she decided to decode the entire ledger, hoping to find more concrete evidence. The task would be daunting, but she had to uncover the truth. And with that newfound resolve, Evie embarked on a journey that would change her life and the fate of countless soldiers forever. It was nearing midnight when Corporal James was rushed into the medical tent. He had been found by a patrol, lying in a shallow trench, his leg mangled from what appeared to be a shell explosion. As Evie and the other nurses worked to stabilize him, James's lucidity wavered, drifting between delirium and moments of painful clarity. During one of these moments, as Evie was administering morphine to numb his agony, James's grip on her wrist tightened. His eyes, wide with terror, locked onto hers.
"They're here,"
he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Confused, Evie tried to soothe him, thinking it was the trauma speaking.
It's all right, James. You're safe now.
But he persisted, desperation evident in his gaze.
"No, Nurse Turner. The shadows. They are here, inside this very camp."
Evie's heart raced. This couldn't be a mere coincidence.
What do you mean by shadows?
He hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to overhear.
"A group,
He murmured.
working in the shadows of our very ranks. I've seen them, late at night, moving bodies, taking things."
A cold dread washed over Evie, the ledger's revelations echoing ominously in her mind.
Did you see who they were?
James nodded weakly.
"Some, yes, but it's bigger than just them. It's an operation, Nurse. They're everywhere."
Evie pressed gently.
Did they see you?
His eyes welled up with tears.
"Yes,
He whispered.
yes, they saw me and they know I saw them. I fear they'll come for me. I've heard rumors. Soldiers who've seen too much. They don't make it out of surgery."
She gently squeezed his hand.
Listen to me, James. You're safe now. I promise I'll protect you. We'll uncover this together.
Yet, even as she spoke those reassuring words, Evie knew the gravity of the situation. Protecting James meant putting herself directly in the crosshairs of this shadow group. Over the next few hours, she discreetly gathered more information from James. Names, dates, places he'd seen suspicious activity. The more he revealed, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just a couple of rogue individuals. It was an intricate network operating under the veil of the chaos of war. Later, as James was sedated and the tent plunged into a semblance of quiet, Evie pondered her next steps. The ledger and James's testimony could be pieces of a puzzle, a sinister tapestry of treachery and deceit that she had to unravel. But she also knew that she couldn't do this alone. She needed allies, those she could trust implicitly. She thought of Nurse Clara, who had been with her since the beginning, and Corporal Mitchell, a trusted friend from her hometown. Together they could form a team, driven by the singular purpose of exposing this nefarious operation. However, as dawn began to break and a new day commenced on the front lines, Evie couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling. She was standing on the precipice of a dark abyss, about to plunge into depths unknown. The catalyst had been set, and the course of her life was irrevocably altered. The shadows of the camp had unveiled themselves, and Evie Turner was now in their line of sight. The following nights were a lesson in patience and vigilance for Evie. Using Corporal James' information as a starting point, she began observing the medics he had mentioned. By day, their behaviour seemed routine, their actions unremarkable. But by night, as the camp sank into an uneasy sleep, their true colours began to emerge. One evening, as a mist rolled in, shrouding the camp in a silvery veil, Evie caught a glimpse of two medics she had grown suspicious of. Dr. Larson, a tall, wiry man with a constantly furrowed brow, and Nurse Carter, with her jet-black hair always impeccably tied up. They were hastily moving between tents, their actions furtive, their glances paranoid. Dressed in dark attire to blend with the shadows, Evie decided to follow them, maintaining a safe distance. As they moved towards the periphery of the camp, her pulse quickened. The terrain became rougher, the scars of war more evident. Abandoned trenches crisscrossed the ground, remnants of battles long past. Suddenly, Larson and Carter stopped near an inconspicuous mound of earth. After a brief exchange of words, Larson retrieved a rusted key from his pocket, inserting it into a barely visible lock embedded in the ground. To Evie's astonishment, a hidden trapdoor opened, revealing a dimly lit stairwell that descended into the earth. The two conspirators descended, and Evie waited a few moments before cautiously approaching. The stairwell led to a cold underground chamber, the walls of which were damp and echoed with the distant drips of water. The room was filled with an assortment of medical equipment. Along one wall stood a series of large, ice-filled containers. The chilling realization hit her. These were makeshift refrigeration units, likely housing the stolen organs. Hidden behind a stack of wooden crates, Evie strained to listen to Larson and Carter's conversation. Their voices, though hushed, echoed slightly in the cavernous space.
The last shipment fetched a good price. The buyer in Paris is eager for more,
Carter whispered. Larson replied, his voice dripping with greed.
Good. With the battles intensifying, supply won't be an issue. We just need to ensure our operations remain hidden.
The mention of a foreign buyer cemented Evie's fears. This was a vast operation, likely extending its tendrils beyond the confines of the camp, reaching into the heart of Europe's dark underbelly. As she contemplated her next move, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the chamber filled the air. Panic set in. If she was discovered, there was no telling what they would do to her. Thinking quickly, she noticed a narrow passageway on the opposite side of the room. Without hesitation, she darted towards it, praying it would offer an escape route. The footsteps grew louder, the voices of Larson and Carter tinged with confusion.
Did you hear that?
Carter hissed. The passageway, damp and narrow, seemed to stretch endlessly. Evie's breaths came fast, her heart thundering in her chest. Behind her, she could hear the medics, their pursuit echoing in the confined space. She willed herself to move faster, the weight of the knowledge she carried pushing her forward. Suddenly, up ahead, a faint light pierced the darkness. The passageway led to another exit, a ladder leading up to another concealed trapdoor. Wasting no time, Evie ascended, pushing the trapdoor open and emerging into the cool night air. Without pausing to catch her breath, she ran, putting as much distance as she could between herself and her pursuers. By the time she reached the relative safety of her tent, dawn was beginning to break. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her cot, her mind racing. The investigation had unearthed dark secrets, a shadowy underworld operating right under their noses. And now, Evie Turner was no longer just an observer. She was a direct threat to their operation. The game of cat and mouse had only just begun. Over the next few days, Evie dedicated herself to piecing together the sprawling conspiracy. Every stolen moment was spent decoding the ledger, correlating dates and names, and identifying the key players in the operation. It wasn't just the act of organ theft that chilled her, it was the familiarity of some of the names involved. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. While cross-referencing the ledger with medical records, a pattern emerged. The most critically wounded soldiers, the ones with the least likelihood of survival, always seemed to be assigned to Dr. Jeffrey Harris. This discovery was a blow. Dr. Harris was renowned, respected not just for his surgical skills, but also for his ethical standards. Evie had always looked up to him as a mentor and a pillar of hope in these tumultuous times. One evening, needing answers and proof, she decided to confront him. Armed with the ledger and the decoded names, she entered Dr. Harris's personal tent. He was there, poring over medical charts, his face lit by the dim glow of a lantern.
Dr. Harris,
Evie began, her voice trembling slightly.
I need to ask you about this.
She thrust the ledger onto his table. He looked at her, surprise evident in his eyes, then turned his attention to the ledger. As he skimmed through the coded entries, his face paled.
Where did you find this?
He asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
Does it matter?
Evie retorted.
I need to know if you are a part of this.
He sighed, setting the ledger down.
Evie, there are things about this war, about our situation, that you may not fully understand.
I understand enough. I understand betrayal.
Dr. Harris looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resignation.
It started with good intentions. With the war draining resources, funding became scarce. How were we to keep the hospital running, to get the supplies we needed?
Evie shook her head in disbelief.
By trading in organs? By deciding who lives and who dies?
We made choices,
He replied defensively.
difficult choices. The ones in the ledger, they were soldiers who weren't likely to survive. I believed, that their sacrifice could fund our operations, could save countless others.
And what gave you the right to play God?
Evie's voice was filled with anger. Dr. Harris's eyes met hers.
The war it forced us to make unthinkable choices. Every day we decide who gets the last dose of morphine, who gets operated on first. This was just another choice, a way to ensure the greater good.
Evie felt tears prickling her eyes.
They trusted you, we all did.
I know.
He murmured, looking down.
And I will carry that weight for the rest of my life. But ask yourself, Evie, in these desperate times, what lines are we willing to cross to save lives? Where do we draw the line?
She backed away, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her.
This isn't over. The truth will come out.
As she left the tent, the reality of the situation bore down on her. Her mentor, her guiding light, was entwined in a web of deceit. The very foundations of her beliefs were shaken. The war had not only taken lives, it had taken their very humanity, forcing them into the grey realm of moral ambiguity. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Evie enlisted the help of Nurse Clara and Corporal Mitchell. Together they meticulously documented every piece of evidence, connecting the dots between the rogue medics and their shadowy operation. They decided on a night to confront the conspirators. A night when the moon would be in full splendour, uncovering the camp of her darkness and secrecy. Armed with the ledger, photographs and testimonials, they sought to corner the rogue medics and force a confession out of them. Under the cloak of secrecy, Evie, Clara and Mitchell made their way to the underground chamber she had discovered days earlier. As expected, they found Dr. Larson, Nurse Carter, and to Evie's dismay, Dr. Harris, deep in a discussion. The tension in the room was palpable as the three conspirators realized they were no longer alone. Evie stepped forward, her voice steady.
It's over. We know everything.
Dr. Harris met her gaze, his face a mask of defiance and regret.
Evie, I had hoped it wouldn't come to this.
Clara brandished the ledger.
This is damning evidence. The best thing for all of you is to confess and face the consequences.
Dr. Larson laughed, a cold, humourless sound.
Ha ha! Ha ha ha! And let our noble cause be trampled upon. No, we won't go down without a fight.
A heated argument ensued, each side defending their actions. The rogue medics spoke of the greater good, of the lives saved because of the funds they raised. But Evie and her allies remained unmoved, emphasising the sanctity of each life, the oath they took as healers. As the verbal battle raged, Evie noticed Dr. Harris fumbling with a stack of papers. His voice rose, cutting through the chaos.
Perhaps you all should see this.
He held up a photograph, a damning image of Evie entering the underground chamber.
We've been documenting our operations, but from an outsider's perspective, it would seem like Nurse Turner here is the ringleader.
Dr. Harris declared, his voice dripping with faux regret.
It's her word against ours.
Evie's heart raced. This was a twist she hadn't anticipated.
You're framing me?
Dr. Harris shrugged.
Desperate times, my dear.
Mitchell stepped forward, anger evident in his voice.
You won't get away with this. We have witnesses.
Dr. Larson smirked.
Who? Wounded soldiers who won't make it through the night?
The room was thick with tension, each side weighing their next move. It was a standoff, a battle of wills and morals. Suddenly, the stillness was shattered by the sound of multiple footsteps approaching. The tent's entrance was thrown open, revealing a group of high-ranking officers, led by none other than General Thompson. Evie's heart sank further. If Dr. Harris and his accomplices convinced the general of her guilt, her fate would be sealed. General Thompson surveyed the room, his gaze sharp.
What is the meaning of this?
Dr. Harris stepped forward.
General, we've uncovered a black market operation led by Nurse Turner. We have evidence.
He pointed towards the photograph. Evie felt Clara's grip on her arm, her fingers digging in, but she stepped forward, determination burning in her eyes.
That's a lie, sir. We have the real evidence here.
She motioned to the ledger and the other documents. The general took a moment, scanning the faces in the room.
We will review all the evidence. For now, everyone is confined to their quarters.
The night's events took a toll on everyone. The camp was buzzing with rumors, the atmosphere thick with uncertainty. The following morning, a military tribunal was convened. The evidence was presented, testimonies heard, and after what felt like an eternity, the rogue medics were found guilty. The photograph of Evie was deemed a desperate attempt at diversion. As the guilty were led away, Dr. Harris caught Evie's eye, a mix of anger and regret evident in his gaze. Evie, though vindicated, felt no joy. The events had left an indelible mark on her soul. She realized the war had many faces, and sometimes the enemy lurked within, hidden behind familiar faces and veiled intentions. The battle might have been won, but the war, with its moral complexities and shadows, raged on. The morning sun painted the camp in warm hues, a stark contrast to the cold, somber mood that hung in the air. The rogue medics, once respected pillars of the makeshift hospital, were now pariahs, shackled and under the watchful eyes of the military police. Their swift apprehension was a testament to the severity of their crimes. Whispers circulated throughout the camp, stories of betrayal, of a clandestine operation that profited from the very pain and suffering they were sworn to alleviate. But amidst the tales of treachery, another narrative emerged, one of a brave young nurse who dared to challenge the shadows, to shine a light on the darkest corners of human depravity. Evie, though exonerated, found little comfort in her newfound status as a hero. The accolades and praises that were heaped upon her felt hollow. The weight of what she had uncovered, the very notion that those she trusted were capable of such atrocities, weighed heavily on her heart. In the following days, she found solace in the company of Corporal Mitchell and Nurse Clara. They too bore the scars of the revelation, their faith in humanity tested and shaken. Together they formed a support system, leaning on one another as they tried to come to terms with the events that had transpired. One evening, as Evie sat by the campfire staring into the dancing flames, General Thompson approached her. His gruff demeanor was softened, replaced with an air of compassion.
Nurse Turner,
he began.
I wanted to personally thank you. What you did, it took immense courage.
Evie met his gaze, her eyes tired but resolute.
Sir, I only did what I felt was right. I couldn't stand by and let such horrors continue.
The general nodded.
War tests us in ways we can never imagine. It brings out the best, and unfortunately, the worst in people. But it's individuals like you who remind us of the good that remains.
Evie smiled weakly, her thoughts drifting to Corporal James, whose whispers had set the wheels of justice in motion.
It was a collective effort, sir. We all played a part.
The general paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully.
The war is far from over, Nurse Turner. But battles like these, the ones that challenge our very morality and ethics, they're the ones that truly matter. And in this battle, you emerged victorious.
Evie sighed, looking out into the vast expanse.
At what cost, General? The faces of those we lost, the trust that was shattered. Can we ever truly heal?
He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder.
In time, perhaps. But for now, all we can do is move forward, holding on to the hope that tomorrow will be better.
The days turned into weeks, and life in the camp slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. but the scars of the past lingered, a constant reminder of the price of integrity and the depths of human greed. Evie continued her duties, tending to the wounded with renewed vigor and dedication. Each life she touched, each soldier she comforted, became a testament to her resilience, her determination to find goodness amidst the chaos. Yet every night, as she lay in her cot, the memories would return. The faces of the rogue medics, the cold calculating eyes of Dr. Harris, and the haunting revelations of the underground chamber. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a restless contemplation of the human condition. In the heart of war, amidst the cacophony of gunfire and the cries of the wounded, Evie Turner had confronted a different kind of battle, one that challenged her beliefs, her values, and her very understanding of humanity. And so the external battle raged on, the internal one, with its complex tapestry of emotions, would remain with her forever. As the war continued its relentless march, Evie held on to a singular hope that out of the darkness, out of the pain and betrayal, would emerge a brighter, more compassionate world. A world where the horrors of the past would serve as a reminder, a beacon guiding humanity towards a better, more just future.
Epilogue. Years after Evie's heart-wrenching discoveries, the shadows of organ trafficking continued to stretch across the globe. The black market for organs, a clandestine web of deceit and desperation, burgeoned in the backdrop of overwhelming demand and scanty legal supply. It was estimated that every hour 5 people died waiting for an organ, and this desperate need birthed a nefarious industry. Donors, often from impoverished backgrounds, were lured by traffickers with promises of wealth, only to receive a minuscule fraction of the organ's selling price. Kidneys became a currency of desperation, with their extraction often conducted under unsanitary conditions, risking the lives of the donors. The recipients, on the other hand, grappled with ethical quandaries. Many were unaware of the organ's illicit origins, while others, driven by the instinct for survival, chose to overlook it. The line between life and death blurred their moral compass, making them unintentional accomplices in this dark trade. As the world moved forward, grappling with its many complexities, the tales of wartime horrors and modern-day organ trafficking stood as stark reminders. They echoed the profound challenges of human ethics, the fragility of morality when confronted with desperation, and the continuous struggle between humanity's shadows and the light of its better angels.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Quantum Dispatches, and stay tuned next week for another thrilling adventure. Thank you for listening.